The faded sepia photograph sits under the bright lights of the conservation lab at Westmore Historical Society. Dust particles dance in the air as Dr. Eleanor Pierce adjusts her glasses and leans in closer. The image shows 15 children arranged in 3 rows outside a stone building, their expressions solemn, their clothes threadbare but neat. A tall, severe-looking woman stands at the edge of the frame, her hand resting on what appears to be a walking cane. Blackwood Orphanage, 1899, Eleanor murmurs, reading the faded inscription at the bottom of the photograph, found in the attic of the old Harrington estate during demolition. Her assistant, James Chen, types notes into his laptop. The Harrington family funded several orphanages in New England during the late 19th century. This must be one of them. Eleanor's finger hovers over the photograph, tracing the outline of the building in the background. Look at this architecture. Distinctive Gothic revival. Quite grand for an orphanage, even one funded by the Harringtons. She slides the photograph under the digital microscope, and the image appears on the large monitor on the wall. James watches as she methodically begins scanning the photograph, section by section, documenting every detail. Typical formal composition for the period, Eleanor notes. The children appear between 6 and 12 years of age. Clothing consistent with 1890s institutional wear. The matron, this woman here, is wearing typical mourning attire of the late Victorian era. James leans forward. Can you zoom in on her face? Eleanor adjusts the magnification. The matron's features come into sharper focus. A thin mouth pressed into a firm line. Deep-set eyes staring directly at the camera, skin pale against her black dress. Mrs. Agatha Blackwood, presumably, Eleanor says. According to our records, she was the founder and head mistress of the orphanage. There's something unsettling about her expression, James observes. Like she's looking right through the camera. Eleanor nods slowly. Victorian photographs often have that quality because of the long exposure times. Subjects had to remain perfectly still, which created that haunting, penetrating stare. She moves the lens across the row of children, zooming in on each small face. Look at their eyes, she says quietly. No smiles. Not unusual for photographs of this period, but there's something different here. Different how? James asks, leaning closer to the screen. I'm not sure yet. Let me enhance this section. Eleanor adjusts the settings on the microscope, increasing the resolution. The children's faces become clearer, 15 pairs of eyes staring back at them from across more than a century. Wait, James says suddenly. Go back to that boy on the end of the middle row. Eleanor moves the lens back, focusing on a small boy of perhaps 8 or 9, his cap pulled low over his forehead. There, James points to the screen. In his eyes. Do you see that? Eleanor enhances the image further. The boy's eyes reflect something, a tiny, distinctive shape captured in the moment the photograph was taken. It's a reflection, she murmurs. Something behind the photographer. She increases the magnification to the maximum setting, focusing on that minute detail preserved in the child's wide, fearful eyes. And then she sees it. My God, she whispers. James stares at the screen, his face paling. Is that? Yes, Eleanor says, her voice barely audible. And it's in all of their eyes. Every single child in this photograph is looking at the same thing. In the reflection captured in 15 pairs of eyes, barely visible even with modern technology, is the unmistakable silhouette of a hanging body. Professor Marcus Reed walks briskly through the marble corridors of Westmore University's history department, his footsteps echoing off the polished floors. At 62, he spent nearly 4 decades studying American social history, with a particular focus on institutional care in the 19th century. When Eleanor Pierce called him about the Blackwood Orphanage photograph, he'd dropped everything to come. He knocks on the door of the conservation lab, and Eleanor lets him in, the circles under her eyes suggesting she hasn't slept much. Thank you for coming, Marcus, she says, leading him to the workstation where the photograph sits beneath the microscope. Of course. He nods to James, who's typing rapidly on his laptop. What have you found that's so urgent? Eleanor gestures to the large monitor. See for yourself. Marcus studies the photograph, his expression thoughtful. Blackwood Orphanage. Yes, I'm familiar with it. One of several institutions established by the Harrington family in the 1880s. This particular one was located in western Massachusetts, if I recall correctly. That's right, James confirms. Near Berkshire County. What do you know about Agatha Blackwood? Eleanor asks. Marcus strokes his beard. A complicated figure. Widowed at a young age, she dedicated her life to charitable works. At least that was the public perception. She had connections to several prominent families in New England, including the Harringtons, who financed the orphanage that bore her name. Eleanor zooms in on Agatha's face. And the children in her care? Predominantly from impoverished backgrounds. Many were the children of immigrants or industrial workers who died in factory accidents. The 1890s were a time of significant industrial growth, but also significant industrial hazards. And what happened to the orphanage? James asks. Marcus's expression darkens. It burned down in the winter of 1899. Shortly after this photograph must have been taken, the official report cited a chimney fire, but there were rumors. What kind of rumors? Eleanor asks. Nothing substantiated, Marcus says carefully. Whispers about mistreatment, unusual practices. But that was common gossip about many institutions of the time. Eleanor takes a deep breath. Marcus, we found something in the photograph, something that might lend credence to those rumors. She adjusts the microscope, focusing on the eyes of the children, one after another, showing him the reflection visible in each. Marcus stares at the screen, his expression shifting from curiosity to disbelief. All 15 children, Eleanor says quietly, all showing the same reflection. Someone or something hanging behind the photographer. Marcus sinks into a chair, his face ashen. This is extraordinary and disturbing. We need to know more about what happened at Blackwood, Eleanor says. These children, she gestures to the photograph. They witnessed something terrible, and somehow it was captured in this moment. Marcus nods slowly. I have colleagues at the Massachusetts State Archives who might help us access any surviving records. And there's an historical society in Berkshire County that might have local newspaper accounts. There's something else, James says, turning his laptop around. I've been researching the names of these children. The orphanage records were mostly destroyed in the fire, but I found a partial list in an old charity report. He points to his screen, which shows a scanned document with a list of names. Most of these children disappeared after the fire, he continues, presumed dead. But 3 of them appear in later records. A boy named Thomas Harrow was adopted by a family in Boston. A girl, Emma Caldwell, was sent to a different orphanage in New York. And this boy, he points to the small boy with the cap, whose eyes they'd first examined. William Fletcher, he was transferred to a sanitarium in 1900. A sanitarium? Eleanor frowns. What for? The records don't say specifically, James replies. But I found his admission paperwork. The diagnosis simply states acute melancholia and persistent delusions following traumatic incident. Marcus leans forward. Do we know what became of him? James shakes his head. Not yet. The sanitarium closed in 1920, and many records were lost. But I'm still looking. And what about Agatha Blackwood? Eleanor asks, looking at the matron's stern face on the screen. That's perhaps the strangest part, Marcus says slowly. After the fire, she simply vanished. No death certificate, no further record of her existence. It's as if she disappeared into thin air. Eleanor turns back to the photograph, studying the 15 young faces staring back at her. These children saw something terrible, she says quietly, and I think we owe it to them to find out what it was. The Berkshire County Historical Society is housed in a converted Victorian mansion, its rooms filled with artifacts and documents chronicling the region's past. Eleanor and Marcus sit at a large oak table in the research room, surrounded by boxes of yellowed newspapers and faded correspondence. Here, Marcus says, carefully turning the brittle pages of a ledger. Blackwood Orphanage financial records from 1895 to 1899. Not complete, but it's something. Eleanor peers over his shoulder. Monthly expenses, donations, seems fairly standard. Yes, but look at these entries. Marcus points to a series of payments. Regular disbursements to something called the Threshold Society. No explanation of what services they provided. Eleanor makes a note. And here, unusual purchases, scientific equipment, chemicals, not typical expenses for an orphanage. Agatha Blackwood apparently told the Harrington trustees she was providing advanced education to the children, Marcus explains. Progressive for the time, which helped explain the unusual expenditures. Eleanor turns to another box, pulling out a folder of newspaper clippings. The fire, she says, scanning the headlines. Tragic blaze claims orphanage. 15 children feared lost. She reads further, her brow furrowing. But according to James's research, at least 3 children survived. Why would the papers report that all were feared dead? Inaccurate initial reporting, perhaps, Marcus suggests, but he doesn't sound convinced. Eleanor continues reading. Mrs. Blackwood, the devoted headmistress, is praised for her attempts to save the children. But there's no mention of her fate. She looks up at Marcus. If she survived, why isn't that clearly stated? Before Marcus can answer, an elderly woman approaches their table. She wears a volunteer badge that identifies her as Margaret Sullivan, Historical Society archivist. I couldn't help overhearing, she says. You're researching the Blackwood Orphanage? Marcus stands to greet her. Yes, we're particularly interested in the fire of 1899 and what became of the children and Mrs. Blackwood. Margaret's expression turns grave. My grandmother lived in that town. She was just a girl when it happened, but she remembered it clearly. She glances around, then lowers her voice. The official records don't tell the whole story. What do you mean? Eleanor asks. May I? Margaret gestures to a chair, and they nod. She sits down, folding her hands on the table. The town knew something wasn't right at Blackwood. Children who were adopted or sent to work as apprentices, which was common practice then, would sometimes be seen around town. They were different, hollow-eyed. They wouldn't speak about their time at the orphanage. Different how? Marcus presses gently. My grandmother said they moved like sleepwalkers, and sometimes they would stare at nothing and whisper to empty air. Margaret shakes her head. The local doctor called it institutional shock, but people suspected something more sinister. And the fire? Eleanor asks. Margaret leans closer. It started in the basement, not the chimney. And it started in the middle of the day, not at night as the official report claimed. A local man, a delivery driver, saw smoke and rushed in. He managed to get a few children out before the building was engulfed. What he saw in the basement haunted him for the rest of his life. What did he see? Marcus asks. He never said specifically. Claimed he couldn't remember clearly. But he drew pictures, the same image over and over. A circle with strange markings, children standing around it, and a figure hanging above. Eleanor and Marcus exchange a glance. Do any of these drawings still exist? Eleanor asks. Margaret nods slowly. The man's name was Joseph Miller. His granddaughter still lives in town. She might be willing to speak with you. The Miller house sits at the end of a quiet street on the outskirts of town, a modest 2-story building with a well-tended garden. Helen Miller, a woman in her 70s with silver hair and kind eyes, welcomes them into her living room. I don't often talk about my grandfather's experience, she says, offering them tea. It caused him so much pain. But when Margaret called and explained your research, I felt perhaps it was time. We appreciate you speaking with us, Eleanor says gently. We're trying to understand what happened at the Blackwood Orphanage. Helen's hands tremble slightly as she sets down her teacup. Grandfather was delivering coal that day. He wasn't supposed to be there until the following morning, but they'd had a cancellation, so he arrived early. She takes a deep breath. He said he heard chanting as he approached the building. Then he saw smoke coming from a basement window. What did he do? Marcus asks. He broke in through the kitchen door, found several children on the main floor. They seemed dazed, confused. He led them outside, then went back in to find more. Helen's voice wavers. That's when he went down to the basement. She stands and walks to a sideboard, opening a drawer. He never spoke in detail about what he saw, but he drew it, over and over again for years afterward. She returns with a leather-bound sketchbook, its pages yellowed with age. These are his original drawings. I've kept them all these years, though I'm not entirely sure why. Eleanor accepts the book carefully, opening it to the first page. The drawing is done in charcoal, a circular symbol with intricate patterns inside it, surrounded by small figures representing children. Above the circle hangs a larger figure, suspended in midair. My God, Marcus whispers, looking over her shoulder. It matches the reflection we found in the photograph. Eleanor turns the pages. The same scene, drawn repeatedly, sometimes with slight variations. More details in the circular pattern, clearer depictions of the suspended figure. Your grandfather saved 3 children that day, Eleanor says. Did he ever speak of them? Helen nods. He visited them afterward. One boy in particular, William, I believe his name was. Grandfather felt responsible for him somehow. William Fletcher, Marcus confirms. He was sent to a sanitarium. Yes, Helen says sadly. The poor child was never the same after what he witnessed. Grandfather visited him every month until the boy died. Died? Eleanor looks up sharply. How old was he? Just 14. He took his own life in 1905. Helen's eyes fill with tears. Grandfather blamed himself for not saving more children and for not stopping what was happening sooner. Did he ever explain what it was? Marcus asks gently. Helen shakes her head. He said some things were best left unspoken. But he left a letter sealed with instructions that it should only be opened if someone came asking specific questions about the orphanage. She meets their eyes. Questions like yours. She leaves the room briefly, returning with an envelope, the paper brittle with age, the seal still intact. On the front, in faded ink, is written, "To be opened only in the event that the truth of Blackwood must be known." Eleanor accepts it with trembling hands. "May we?" Helen nods. "I believe that's why he wrote it." Eleanor carefully breaks the seal and unfolds the letter inside. The handwriting is shaky but legible. "To whom it may concern. If you are reading this, you have discovered something about the Blackwood orphanage that has led you to seek the truth. I pray this letter finds its way to someone who will use this knowledge wisely. What I witnessed in the basement of that orphanage on December 12, 1899, defies rational explanation. Mrs. Blackwood had gathered the children in a circle around a symbol drawn on the floor in what appeared to be ash and blood. Candles burned at specific points around the circle. Above them, suspended from a beam, hung the body of a man I did not recognize. The children were chanting words I could not understand, their voices flat, their eyes vacant. Mrs. Blackwood stood at the head of the circle, reading from an ancient book bound in what looked like human skin. When she saw me, she smiled. A terrible, knowing smile that froze my blood. She said only, "You're too late. The threshold is open." At that moment, the hanging body began to twitch and move, though the man was clearly dead. Something was emerging from his mouth, a dark substance that seemed neither liquid nor gas, but something in between. I grabbed the nearest children and fled. The fire spread rapidly after that, consuming the building with unnatural speed. I saw Mrs. Blackwood emerge from the flames, seemingly untouched by them. In her arms was a child, the youngest boy, no more than 6 years old. They walked into the woods behind the orphanage and disappeared. In the days that followed, strange occurrences plagued the town. Livestock died mysteriously. Children reported seeing a woman in black standing outside their windows at night. 3 townspeople disappeared without trace. The surviving children spoke of experiments conducted in the basement, blood drawings, forced consumption of strange concoctions, hours spent staring at symbols until they saw them move. They spoke of Mrs. Blackwood's special children, those who showed particular sensitivity to what she called the world beyond the threshold. I have spent the rest of my life researching what I witnessed. I believe Mrs. Blackwood was part of an ancient cult, the Threshold Society, dedicated to opening doorways to other realms of existence. The orphans were not merely wards in her care. They were subjects in her twisted experiments, chosen because they had no family to miss them if they were lost. What became of Mrs. Blackwood and the child she took with her, I cannot say with certainty, but in 1927, I encountered a young man in Boston whose features haunted me with their familiarity. When I approached him, he smiled the same terrible smile I had seen on Mrs. Blackwood's face all those years ago. Before I could speak, he said, "Mr. Miller, she said you might still be looking." Then he walked away, disappearing into the crowd. I write this account knowing it may never be read, or worse, that it may be dismissed as the ravings of a traumatized mind. But I swear on all that is holy that what I have written here is true. If you have found evidence that corroborates any part of this account, I implore you, proceed with caution. Some doors, once opened, cannot easily be closed again. Joseph Miller. April 17th, 1940. Eleanor's hands shake as she finishes reading. The room is silent except for the ticking of an old clock on the mantel. "This is," Marcus begins, but words seem to fail him. "The reflection in the children's eyes," Eleanor says softly. "They were photographed during one of these rituals." The hanging body was behind the photographer. Helen Miller looks between them, her expression troubled. "You found evidence that supports his account?" Eleanor hesitates, then nods. "We've been examining a photograph of the children taken in 1899. Modern technology has allowed us to see details invisible to the naked eye, including a reflection in the children's eyes of what appears to be a hanging figure." Helen pales. "Then my grandfather wasn't delusional?" "No, Mrs. Miller," Marcus says gently. "Your grandfather witnessed something real, something terrible." "There's more," Eleanor says, turning back to the photograph they've brought with them. "The matron, Mrs. Blackwood. We've been trying to trace what happened to her after the fire." "And?" Helen asks. "She seems to have disappeared completely," Marcus explains. No death certificate, no further records. Helen is quiet for a moment, then rises and crosses to a bookshelf. She returns with a small, leather-bound album. "My grandfather kept newspaper clippings," she explains, opening the album. "Not just about the orphanage fire, but anything he thought might be connected." She turns to a page near the back of the album. This is from 1927, the same year he mentioned encountering that young man in Boston. The yellowed newspaper clipping shows a group photograph taken at a university event. The headline reads, "Miskatonic University welcomes distinguished lecturer in anthropological studies." In the background of the photograph, partially obscured but still recognizable, stands a woman whose features have barely aged since 1899. Beside her is a young man of about 30, his expression solemn, his eyes unnaturally pale even in the black and white photograph. "Is that?" Eleanor begins. "Agatha Blackwood," Helen confirms, "and possibly the boy she took with her from the orphanage, now grown. Grandfather circled them in red ink when he found this photograph. He wrote on the back." She turns the clipping over. In faded handwriting are the words, "They do not age. God help us all." Back at Westmore University, Eleanor, Marcus, and James sit in Eleanor's office, surrounded by their research materials. The Blackwood photograph sits in a protective case on the desk, the faces of the 15 children seeming to watch them with solemn eyes. "So what do we know for certain?" James asks, organizing his notes. The Blackwood Orphanage was established in the 1880s by Agatha Blackwood with funding from the Harrington family, Eleanor begins. Ostensibly a charitable institution, but in reality it appears to have been a front for something far more sinister. "This Threshold Society," Marcus adds. "I've been researching occult groups from that period. There are references to a society by that name in some obscure texts. They believed in the existence of parallel dimensions and sought ways to access them, using children as, what, mediums? Test subjects?" James looks disturbed. "Possibly both," Marcus says grimly. "There was a belief in certain occult circles that children, particularly orphaned children with traumatic backgrounds, were more sensitive to supernatural influences, more receptive to what they called the thinning of the veil." Eleanor pulls out Joseph Miller's letter. According to this eyewitness account, Blackwood was conducting some kind of ritual when the fire broke out. Miller interrupted it, but not before. Something had already begun, and Blackwood escaped with at least one child, James says, then reappeared decades later, seemingly unaged. Eleanor adds, pointing to the university newspaper clipping. "But that would be impossible," James protests. Marcus shakes his head slowly. "Unless she succeeded in what she was attempting. If we take Miller's account at face value, she was trying to open a doorway to another dimension or realm of existence. What if she succeeded, and whatever she accessed there changed her somehow?" They sit in silence for a moment, the implications hanging in the air between them. "There's another avenue we haven't fully explored," Eleanor says finally. "The 3 children who survived the fire. We know William Fletcher died in 1905, but what about the other 2? Thomas Harrow and Emma Caldwell?" James turns to his laptop. "I've been tracing them. Thomas Harrow was adopted by a prominent Boston family. He attended Harvard, became a doctor, and established a private practice specializing in psychiatric care. He died in 1972. Any descendants?" Marcus asks. "One daughter, Catherine Harrow. She's still alive, 85 years old, living in a retirement community in Cambridge." "And Emma Caldwell?" Eleanor asks. James's expression turns troubled. "Her path was darker. After being transferred to the orphanage in New York, she ran away at 16. There are police records of her arrest for vagrancy and disrupting religious services. According to the reports, she would break into churches and deface religious symbols. Trauma manifesting as religious antipathy," Marcus suggests. "Not uncommon." "Perhaps," James agrees. "But there's more. In 1920, she was committed to an asylum in upstate New York. The diagnosis was religious mania and dangerous delusions. The same year the sanitarium housing William Fletcher closed down," Eleanor notes. "Yes," James continues. "She remained institutionalized until 1947 when she was released into the care of a Dr. Thomas Harrow." "Wait," Marcus interrupts. "Thomas Harrow, the boy from the orphanage, took custody of Emma Caldwell?" James nods. "It appears so. And here's where it gets even stranger. After that, they both disappear from official records for nearly a decade. Then, in 1956, They reappear as the founders of the Threshold Institute for Gifted Children in Western Massachusetts. The Threshold Institute? Eleanor's voice is barely a whisper. Using the same name as the occult society Blackwood belonged to. It operated until 1972, when Thomas Harrow died, James says. After that, Emma Caldwell apparently continued running it until her own death in 1985. And the institute itself? Marcus asks. Closed in 1986. The property was sold to a developer who planned to turn it into a resort, but the project was abandoned after a series of accidents during renovation. It's been vacant ever since. Eleanor stands abruptly. We need to find Catherine Harrow. If anyone might know what really happened to those children after the fire, it would be Thomas Harrow's daughter. Oakwood Retirement Community is a sprawling complex of neat buildings surrounded by well-maintained gardens. Catherine Harrow receives them in her private apartment, a spacious room filled with books and mementos from a long life. At 85, she remains sharp-eyed and articulate, her white hair cut in a stylish bob, her posture still remarkably straight. She listens carefully as they explain their research into the Blackwood Orphanage and her father's connection to it. I wondered if someone would come asking eventually, she says when they finish. Father said they would someday. Your father spoke about his time at the orphanage? Eleanor asks gently. Catherine's expression grows distant. Not often, and never in detail. It was clearly painful for him, but he had nightmares, terrible nightmares that plagued him his entire life. Sometimes he would wake screaming about the circle and the hanging man. Marcus leans forward. Mrs. Harrow, we've discovered evidence suggesting that your father and Emma Caldwell were subjected to occult rituals while at the orphanage. Did he ever speak of anything like that? Catherine is silent for a long moment. Not directly, but he was obsessed with certain subjects: dimensional theory, consciousness transference, the nature of reality. His psychiatric practice specialized in treating children with what he called threshold sensitivity. And the Threshold Institute that he founded with Emma Caldwell, Eleanor says. What was its true purpose? Catherine rises and walks to a cabinet in the corner of the room. She removes a key from around her neck and unlocks it, taking out a small wooden box. My father left this for me, with instructions to share it only if approached by serious researchers with specific knowledge of Blackwood. She returns to her seat. You've mentioned the ritual, the hanging man, and Agatha Blackwood's apparent agelessness. That's specific enough, I think. She opens the box and removes a journal bound in dark leather. This is my father's account of what happened at Blackwood, what he and Emma experienced afterward, and why they established the institute. She hands it to Eleanor, who accepts it with reverent care. May we? Eleanor asks, and Catherine nods. Eleanor opens the journal to the first page, which bears a simple title, The Truth of Blackwood. I write this account in the year 1971, knowing that my heart is failing and I may not have much time left. Emma insists that we must leave a record, though we have spent our lives ensuring that the knowledge we possess does not fall into the wrong hands. I was 8 years old when I was sent to Blackwood Orphanage after my parents died in a factory fire. From the first day, I sensed that it was no ordinary institution. Mrs. Blackwood would walk the dormitory at night, standing over our beds, watching us sleep. Children would be taken to the basement for what she called special lessons and return changed, quieter, more compliant, their eyes somehow different. Emma, William, and I formed a secret alliance. We would whisper to each other in the dark, sharing what we had seen and heard. William, who was younger than us, would cry in his sleep, talking about the thing behind the wall that Mrs. Blackwood was trying to bring through. The rituals began subtly, exercises in concentration, staring at symbols until our vision blurred, drinking herbal concoctions that caused strange dreams. Then they became more intense. Blood was drawn from each of us, added to the symbols painted on the basement floor. We were taught chants in a language none of us recognized, punished severely if we mispronounced even a syllable. On December 12, 1899, Mrs. Blackwood told us that we had been preparing for a great purpose, and that day had finally arrived. She had a man with her, tall, thin, with eyes that seemed to reflect no light. She never introduced him, but we heard her call him Brother Ambrose. What happened next I have tried for decades to rationalize, to explain away as the traumatized perception of a frightened child, but I cannot. Emma remembers it the same way. William did too, before he took his own life. Brother Ambrose removed his clothes and stepped into the center of the symbol painted on the floor. Mrs. Blackwood placed a noose around his neck, attached to a beam above. He smiled as she did this, a terrible, ecstatic smile. The children were positioned around the circle. Mrs. Blackwood stood at the head, reading from a book bound in something that looked like flesh. The words made my ears hurt and my vision swim. Brother Ambrose stepped onto a small stool, placed the noose around his neck, and then kicked the stool away. His body jerked, swung, went still. But then it began to move again, in ways that no dead body should move. His mouth opened, wider than any human mouth could open, and something began to emerge from it, something dark and fluid and wrong. That was when the fire started. To this day, I don't know how. Perhaps one of the candles fell. Perhaps it was divine intervention. A man burst in, Mr. Miller, I would later learn, and in the chaos, Emma, William, and I managed to escape. What became of the other children, I cannot say with certainty. What emerged from Brother Ambrose's mouth, I cannot describe with any accuracy. Some memories are too terrible to hold clearly in the mind. I was adopted by the Harrow family of Boston, who provided me with every advantage. I excelled in school, attended Harvard, became a doctor. I tried to forget Blackwood, but the dreams wouldn't let me forget. In my dreams, I still stood in that circle. In my dreams, the thing from Brother Ambrose's mouth still emerged, still reached for us with appendages that were neither tentacles nor fingers, but something in between. In 1947, I learned that Emma Caldwell was in an asylum in New York. I arranged for her release into my care. She was damaged, we all were, but together we began to piece together what had happened to us, what had been done to us, and why. Emma had spent years researching the threshold society that Mrs. Blackwood belonged to. It was ancient, predating Christianity, dedicated to accessing what they called the spaces between worlds. They believed that human consciousness could be trained to perceive and eventually enter these spaces, but that the training had to begin in childhood. We established the Threshold Institute in 1956, not to continue Blackwood's work, but to find and help children who had been damaged as we had been. Children with what I came to call threshold sensitivity, an ability to perceive aspects of reality that most humans cannot. Children who were vulnerable to exploitation by those who would use their gifts for darker purposes. Over the years, we identified dozens of such children and provided them with safe haven and training to control their abilities. We also tracked down and dismantled 3 separate attempts to recreate what Blackwood had tried to achieve. But we never found Agatha Blackwood herself, nor the young boy she took with her from the orphanage on that terrible day. There have been sightings over the decades, a woman whose appearance never changes, accompanied by a male whose age seems to vary from adolescent to adult, though his features remain eerily similar. In 1962, a photograph was taken at an archaeological dig in Egypt that shows a woman bearing a striking resemblance to Blackwood standing beside a sarcophagus covered in symbols identical to those used in the basement rituals. The dig was funded by a shell corporation that Emma traced to a holdings company called Threshold Investments. I believe that whatever emerged from Brother Ambrose that day was not fully banished when the ritual was interrupted. I believe that Mrs. Blackwood and the child she took, whom we know only as Michael from the orphanage records, are still pursuing the same goal, opening a permanent doorway between our world and whatever lies beyond the threshold. If you are reading this, then you have discovered something that has led you to seek answers about Blackwood. I have given you what I know. What you do with this knowledge is your responsibility now. One final warning: if you pursue this matter further, be vigilant. Those who have investigated the Threshold Society too closely have met with accidents, disappearances, or sudden mental deterioration. They are still out there, still watching, still waiting for the right moment to try again. And if you ever see a woman who does not age, accompanied by a man with eyes that reflect no light, do not approach them. Run. Run as far and as fast as you can. Thomas Harrow, M.D. October 3rd, 1971. Eleanor closes the journal, her hands shaking. The room is silent as they absorb the implications of what they've just read. Did you ever meet Emma Caldwell? Marcus asks Catherine finally. Yes, Catherine replies. She was like an aunt to me. After Father died, she continued his work at the Institute until her own death. And did you ever encounter anyone matching the description of Agatha Blackwood or this Michael? Eleanor asks. Catherine's expression darkens. Once, at Father's funeral in 1972, a woman and a man stood at the back of the church, not approaching, just watching. Emma became agitated when she saw them, tried to confront them, but they left before she could reach them. She pauses. The strange thing was, I saw the same pair again at Emma's funeral 13 years later. The woman looked identical, not just similar, but exactly the same. The man appeared older, but his features were unchanged. Did you continue your father's work after Emma died? James asks. Catherine shakes her head. I didn't inherit their sensitivity. I'm just an ordinary person, but I've kept their records safe. She gestures to the cabinet from which she'd taken the journal. Everything they documented about the children they helped, the Threshold Society, and their search for Blackwood. It's all there. Mrs. Harrow, Eleanor says carefully, would you be willing to share those records with us? For research purposes only, of course. Catherine studies them for a long moment. You found something in that photograph, she says. Something that corroborates what my father wrote. What was it? Eleanor glances at Marcus, who nods. She takes out her tablet and brings up the enhanced image of the reflection in the children's eyes. Catherine looks at it, her face paling. The hanging man, she whispers, just as father described in his nightmares. She is quiet for a moment, then nods decisively. Yes, I'll share their records with you. But first, there's something else you should see. She rises again, this time going to a closet. From a high shelf, she removes a dusty photo album. These are photographs from the Threshold Institute, she explains, returning to her seat. The children who were helped there over the years. She opens the album. The first pages show a large Victorian house surrounded by gardens, not unlike the Blackwood Orphanage, but brighter, more welcoming. Then come photographs of children engaged in various activities, reading, playing music, sitting in meditation poses. Father and Emma developed techniques to help these children control their sensitivity, Catherine explains. Art therapy, music, meditation, specialized education. They believed that what Blackwood had tried to use for evil purposes could actually be a gift, if properly understood and channeled. She turns the page to a group photograph dated 1965. About 20 children of various ages stand on the front steps of the Institute, with Thomas Harrow and Emma Caldwell at the center. Wait, James says suddenly, pointing to a figure at the edge of the photograph. Who is that? A teenage girl stands slightly apart from the others, her expression solemn, her eyes eerily pale even in the black and white photograph. That's Elizabeth Cooper, Catherine says. She came to the Institute in 1964. She was a special case, found wandering in the woods near the ruins of the original Blackwood Orphanage site, with no memory of who she was or how she got there. She could only tell them her name and the resemblance to the woman in the newspaper clipping from Miskatonic University. Eleanor asks, referring to the young man standing beside Agatha Blackwood in the 1927 photograph. Yes, Catherine says quietly. Father noticed it too. They suspected she might be a descendant of Michael, the boy Blackwood took from the orphanage. They kept a close watch on her, tried to help her recover her memories, but they were never able to determine her true origins. What became of her? Marcus asks. She stayed at the Institute until it closed in 1986, then disappeared. There was a theory that she had been placed there deliberately as a kind of spy. Emma suspected that the Threshold Society knew about their work and had been monitoring them for years. Eleanor turns back to the photograph of the Blackwood children, studying their solemn faces. These children, she says softly, they were victims of something terrible, something that's been hidden for over a century. Yes, Catherine agrees, and perhaps now is the time for that truth to finally come to light. None. The archives at Westmore University are silent except for the hum of climate control systems and the occasional rustle of papers. Eleanor, Marcus, and James have spent weeks cataloging and analyzing the records Catherine Harrow provided them. Journals, photographs, case files of children with threshold sensitivity, and decades of research into the Threshold Society. It's remarkable, Marcus says, examining a map marked with locations of suspected Threshold Society activity across the globe. Thomas and Emma were tracking them for years, documenting patterns that no one else noticed. And look at this, James adds, pointing to a file. Children with similar traits appearing in clusters near sites of historical significance. Ancient stone circles in England, temple complexes in Cambodia, cave systems in France with prehistoric paintings. They believed these were natural thin spots between dimensions, Eleanor explains, reading from Thomas Harrow's notes, places where sensitive individuals might perceive what he called bleed-through from other realms of existence. But the Threshold Society wasn't content with just perceiving these other realms, Marcus says grimly. They wanted to open doorways, create permanent connections. Using human sacrifice as the catalyst, Eleanor adds, thinking of the hanging man in the photograph. James looks up from his laptop. I've been cross-referencing the locations on this map with recent news stories. 3 months ago, an archaeological expedition in Egypt was funded by a company called Nexus Holdings. Their corporate structure is nearly identical to the Threshold investments that Thomas Harrow identified in the 1960s. Where in Egypt? Marcus asks sharply. The same site where Blackwood was photographed in 1962, James replies. They've reopened the dig. Eleanor turns to the photograph of the Blackwood children, which sits in a protective case on the table. We know what happened to 3 of these 15 children, she says. What about the others? The official report claimed they all died in the fire, but we know that's not true. I've been researching that, James says, using the names from the partial orphanage record and cross-referencing with census data, newspaper articles, and other sources. He pulls up a document on his laptop. I've managed to trace 4 more children who appear in records after 1899. 4 more survivors. Marcus leans forward. George Wells appears in the 1910 census as a laborer in a textile mill in Lowell, Massachusetts. Sarah Jenkins became a nurse, serving in World War I. Robert Chen moved to San Francisco, opened a laundry business, and Lily Montgomery became a teacher in a small town in Vermont. Any connections between them after the orphanage? Eleanor asks. James nods. That's where it gets interesting. In 1925, all 4 of them were living within a 10-mile radius of each other in western Massachusetts, not far from the original orphanage site. According to local newspaper accounts, they were involved in something called the Blackwood Memorial Trust, ostensibly a charity for orphan children. A cover for their own investigation? Marcus suggests. Possibly, James agrees. But here's the strange part. In 1926, all 4 of them disappeared within the same week. Local papers reported it as a tragic coincidence. George fell from a train platform, Sarah's car went off a bridge, Robert was supposedly lost at sea during a fishing trip, and Lily simply vanished from her boarding house. 1926, Eleanor says slowly. 1 year before Agatha Blackwood and the grown Michael were photographed at Miskatonic University, as if they were tying up loose ends, Marcus suggests. Eleanor turns back to Catherine Harrow's photo album, flipping through the images of children at the Threshold Institute. And what about these children? The ones Thomas and Emma tried to help? James's expression turns grim. I've been tracing them too. Many went on to lead normal lives, but a disturbing number died young or disappeared under mysterious circumstances, including Elizabeth Cooper, Eleanor says, looking at the pale-eyed girl in the 1965 photograph, the one who resembled Michael. I found something about her, James says, pulling up another file. After she disappeared in 1986, a woman matching her description appeared as a visiting lecturer at universities across Europe, specializing in comparative mythology and dimensional theory. Her published papers contain concepts strikingly similar to the Threshold Society's beliefs. So she was a plant, Marcus says, sent to spy on Thomas and Emma, then activated when the institute closed. Eleanor sits back, rubbing her temples. This goes so much deeper than we initially thought. It's not just about what happened at Blackwood Orphanage in 1899. It's about something that's been continuing for more than a century, something still active today. The question is, Marcus says quietly, what do we do with this information? Before Eleanor can respond, there's a knock at the archive door. A security guard peers in. Dr. Pierce, there's someone here asking for you. Says it's urgent. Eleanor frowns. Did they give a name? Yes, ma'am. Dr. Elizabeth Cooper. Says she's with the International Historical Preservation Society. The 3 researchers exchange alarmed glances. Tell her I'll be right out, Eleanor says, her voice steadier than she feels. When the guard leaves, Marcus grabs her arm. Eleanor, you can't meet with her, not after what we've learned. If we refuse, we'll only confirm that we know something, Eleanor replies. Better to see what she wants, what she knows about our research. Then we'll all go, James insists. Eleanor nods. But first, she quickly takes photos of the most crucial documents with her phone, sending them to a secure cloud drive. Then she slips Thomas Harrow's journal into her bag. Just in case, she says grimly. They make their way to the main reception area of the archives. A woman stands by the window, her back to them, looking out at the university grounds. She turns as they approach. She appears to be in her early 70s with silver hair cut in a stylish bob, elegant in a charcoal suit. But her eyes are unnaturally pale, almost colorless, exactly as they were in the 1965 photograph when she was a teenager. "Dr. Pierce?" she says, her voice melodious but somehow flat. "And Dr. Reed and Mr. Chen. How fortunate to find you all together." "Dr. Cooper," Eleanor says cautiously, "what brings you to Westmore?" "The photograph," Elizabeth Cooper replies simply. "The one you've been studying so intently. The children of Blackwood Orphanage, 1899. "How do you know about our research?" Marcus asks. Elizabeth smiles, a smile that doesn't reach those pale eyes. "The Threshold Society has always maintained an interest in that particular institution. When we learned that the photograph had been discovered during the demolition of the Harrington estate, we've been tracking its journey. Imagine our surprise when it fell into the hands of historians with the technology to examine it in ways not possible before." "The Threshold Society," Eleanor repeats. "You're admitting your affiliation openly? Why not? You've clearly learned a great deal already. Catherine Harrow shared her father's journal with you, didn't she? And Emma's records?" Elizabeth glances at Eleanor's bag. "Yes, I thought so." "What do you want?" James asks bluntly. "The same thing you want," Elizabeth replies. "The truth, but perhaps a different aspect of it." She walks to a nearby table, gesturing for them to join her. After a moment's hesitation, they do. "You've discovered what was happening at Blackwood," she continues. "The rituals, the experiments, the attempt to open what Thomas Harrow called a doorway between worlds. What you don't yet understand is why. Enlighten us," Marcus says, his voice cold. Elizabeth reaches into her briefcase and removes a folder. From it, she takes a photograph, modern in color, and places it on the table. It shows a stone tablet covered in symbols identical to those in Joseph Miller's drawings of the basement ritual. "This was discovered in Egypt 3 months ago," she says. Carbon dating places it at approximately 4,000 years old. Similar tablets have been found in Cambodia, Peru, and most recently beneath a medieval church in France, all bearing the same symbols, all referring to the same phenomenon. "Which is?" Eleanor asks. "A thinning of barriers," Elizabeth replies. "Not between dimensions as you might think of them in scientific terms, but between states of existence. What some cultures call the spirit world, others the afterlife, still others the realm of gods or demons." She pauses. "Every major civilization in human history has recorded encounters with beings from beyond our normal perception. The Threshold Society has spent millennia studying these encounters, cataloging them, and yes, attempting to facilitate them. Through child sacrifice?" James asks, disgust evident in his voice. Elizabeth's expression hardens. "That is a crude misunderstanding. The children were never the sacrifice. They were the witnesses, the vessels, the ones whose perception could be trained to see beyond the veil." She taps the photograph of the stone tablet. "The voluntary sacrifice of a prepared adult, like Brother Ambrose in 1899, was merely the catalyst, the key that unlocked the door." "And what came through that door?" Eleanor asks quietly. Elizabeth studies her for a long moment. "Knowledge, power, evolution, the next step in human consciousness. At the cost of children's lives and sanity," Marcus says. "Some, yes," Elizabeth acknowledges without apparent remorse. "But those who survived, those who were transformed by the experience, they became something more than human, something transcendent, like Agatha Blackwood," Eleanor says, "who hasn't aged in over a century." Elizabeth smiles again, that same cold smile, among others. "Why are you telling us this?" James asks. "Because we stand at another threshold now," Elizabeth replies. "Technology has advanced to the point where what once required blood rituals might now be achieved through more elegant means. The digital mapping of consciousness, quantum computing, artificial intelligence, all approaching the same goal that the society has pursued for millennia, transcending the limitations of human existence." She leans forward. "Your research into the Blackwood incident has uncovered valuable historical data. We would like to collaborate." "Collaborate," Eleanor repeats flatly. "With full funding, access to our archives, and the opportunity to be part of something truly revolutionary." Elizabeth turns to Marcus. "Dr. Reed, your work on institutional care in the 19th century has always danced around the edges of what we're discussing. Don't you want to know the full truth?" She looks at James. "Mr. Chen, your technical skills could be invaluable in our current initiatives. And if we decline? Eleanor asks. Elizabeth sits back. Then we'll be disappointed, of course. But the work will continue, with or without you. Her pale eyes move between them. However, given how much you already know, declining would raise concerns about what you might do with that knowledge. The threat hangs in the air, unspoken but clear. We'll need time to consider your offer, Marcus says carefully. Of course, Elizabeth agrees, rising. I'll be in town for 3 days. Here's my card. She places it on the table. I do hope you'll make the right decision. She walks toward the door, then pauses. That photograph you've been studying so intently, did you ever identify all 15 children? Not yet, Eleanor replies cautiously. Elizabeth nods. The boy in the front row, third from the left. His name was Michael Blackwood, Agatha's son, though that wasn't in any official records. She placed him in the orphanage to hide him in plain sight, to prepare him for his role. She smiles once more. My grandfather. With that, she leaves, the door closing softly behind her. The 3 researchers stare at each other in stunned silence. Her grandfather, James whispers finally. That would make her Agatha Blackwood's great-granddaughter. Marcus finishes. If we believe her. More importantly, Eleanor says, her voice shaking slightly, it means the Threshold Society knows exactly what we've discovered and where our research has led us. She quickly gathers their materials. We need to leave, now. Get everything to a secure location. Where? James asks. Eleanor thinks for a moment. Catherine Harrow. She needs to know about this encounter anyway. She turns to Marcus. Can you call her while I pack these files? Marcus nods, already pulling out his phone. As they hurriedly gather their research, Eleanor glances at the photograph of the Blackwood children one last time. 15 solemn faces stare back at her, their eyes holding secrets that have remained hidden for over a century. Secrets that might now put all their lives in danger. Catherine Harrow's retirement community apartment is silent, except for the ticking of the antique clock on the mantel. She sits very still as they recount their encounter with Elizabeth Cooper, her hands folded tightly in her lap. I feared something like this might happen, she says when they finish. When you first came asking about Blackwood, I wondered if it might stir them to action. You knew they were still active? Eleanor asks. Catherine nods. Emma warned me before she died. She said they were watching, always watching. That's why I kept all the records here, where they wouldn't think to look. She glances at the cabinet containing the archive Thomas and Emma had compiled. An elderly woman in a retirement community. Who would suspect? Dr. Cooper, or whoever she really is. Mention new technologies, James says. Digital mapping of consciousness, quantum computing. Do you know anything about that aspect of their work? Only what Emma theorized near the end of her life, Catherine replies. She believed they had shifted their approach from the occult to the scientific, but with the same ultimate goal, transcending human limitations, accessing other realms of existence, and using children as test subjects, Marcus adds grimly. Catherine's expression darkens. That has always been their method. Find children with sensitivity, children who can perceive what others cannot. Train them, shape them, use them as vessels or conduits. Eleanor takes out her phone, showing Catherine the photograph of the stone tablet that Elizabeth had shown them. She claimed this was recently discovered in Egypt, that similar artifacts have been found worldwide, all bearing the same symbols we saw in the Blackwood rituals. Catherine studies the image, her face paling. The circle of crossing, she murmurs. That's what Father called it in his notes. The pattern used to create a tear in the fabric between worlds. Do you think that's really what they're trying to do? James asks. Create some kind of interdimensional portal? I think, Catherine says carefully, that they believe that's what they're doing. Whether such things are truly possible? She shakes her head. Father and Emma were rational, educated people. They wouldn't have dedicated their lives to countering this threat if they didn't believe it was real. Eleanor turns to the files they've brought with them. According to the records, the Threshold Institute identified and helped dozens of children with this sensitivity over the years. Where are those children now? Could they help us understand what we're dealing with? Catherine rises and goes to her desk, removing a small address book. I've stayed in touch with many of them over the years. Some are quite successful. Artists, musicians, scientists with unconventional approaches to their fields. Others, she hesitates. Others have struggled. The sensitivity that made them special also made them vulnerable. Vulnerable to what? Marcus asks. To influence, to manipulation, to what Emma called the whispers from beyond the veil. Catherine opens the address book. There's one person in particular who might be able to help you. Daniel Wright. He was at the Institute from 1967 to 1975, one of the most sensitive children they ever worked with. He's a professor of theoretical physics now at MIT. And you trust him? Eleanor asks. With my life, Catherine replies simply. He was like a son to Father and Emma. They helped him control his abilities, channel them constructively. He's been researching the scientific basis for what the Threshold Society claims to be doing. Can you arrange a meeting? Marcus asks. Catherine nods. I'll call him now. She pauses. But you should know, Elizabeth Cooper will be watching you. The Society has resources, influence. They've infiltrated academic institutions, government agencies, corporations. That's how they've remained hidden for so long, how they've continued their work undisturbed. Then we need to be careful about who we trust, Eleanor says. Starting now. As Catherine makes the call, Eleanor looks at the photograph of the Blackwood children again. Michael Blackwood, Agatha's son, if Elizabeth Cooper is to be believed, stares back at her, a small boy with solemn eyes who would grow up to continue his mother's terrible work, who would father a child, who would bear a child, who would become Elizabeth Cooper. 4 generations of the Blackwood family pursuing the same dark goal across more than a century. And now somehow she, Marcus, and James have become entangled in that legacy, drawn into a conflict that has been raging in the shadows since before they were born. A conflict that, she fears, is approaching some kind of culmination. Professor Daniel Wright's office at MIT is cluttered with books, papers, and strange electronic devices of his own design. At 58, he has the energetic manner of a much younger man, his dark hair streaked with gray, his eyes bright behind wire-rimmed glasses. He listens intently as they explain their research into the Blackwood Orphanage and their encounter with Elizabeth Cooper, occasionally jotting notes or asking clarifying questions. Catherine warned me you'd be coming, he says when they finish. I've been expecting something like this for years, to be honest. The Society has been increasingly active recently, especially in technological circles. Dr. Cooper mentioned digital mapping of consciousness, quantum computing, James says. Are those related to the Society's goals? Daniel nods, his expression grave. They're trying to achieve technologically what they once attempted through occult means. The ultimate goal remains the same, creating a permanent connection to what they call the realm beyond the threshold. And what exactly is this realm? Eleanor asks. Another dimension? Some kind of afterlife? It's not so easily categorized, Daniel replies. Based on my research and my own experiences, it's more accurate to say it's a different state of existence that occasionally intersects with our own. Throughout human history, there have been reports of encounters with beings or phenomena that don't conform to our understanding of reality. Gods, demons, spirits, aliens. The Society believes these are all manifestations of the same fundamental truth, that our universe is just one layer of a much more complex reality. And they want to access this other layer, Marcus says. Not just access it, Daniel corrects. Merge with it. They believe that by creating a permanent connection, they can evolve beyond human limitations, beyond aging, beyond death, beyond the constraints of physical existence. Like Agatha Blackwood, Eleanor says, who hasn't aged in over a century. Daniel's expression darkens. Yes, the partial success of the 1899 ritual created something unprecedented. Agatha and her son Michael were transformed, changed on a fundamental level. Not fully human anymore, but not fully whatever exists beyond the threshold either. Caught between states of being. And they've been continuing their work all this time? James asks. Building toward another attempt, yes, but on a much larger scale. Daniel goes to a filing cabinet, removes a folder, and spreads its contents on his desk. These are satellite images of construction sites around the world, all funded by shell companies I've traced back to Threshold Holdings. The images show massive circular structures being built in remote locations. The Egyptian desert, a mountain plateau in Peru, an island in the South Pacific. They're building modern versions of ancient sites, Daniel explains. Places where the barrier between worlds is naturally thinner. But they're enhancing these sites with technology, quantum processors, experimental energy generators, neural network systems. For what purpose? Marcus asks. A synchronized global event, Daniel says grimly. A simultaneous attempt to open portals at multiple locations, creating a network of connection points that would be much more stable than any single breakthrough. Eleanor feels a chill run down her spine. When? Based on their timetable and the stage of construction, Daniel consults his notes. Within the next 3 months, possibly sooner. And what would happen if they succeed? James asks. Daniel is silent for a moment. The honest answer is that I don't know for certain, but based on everything I've studied, everything I've sensed, it would fundamentally alter our reality. The laws of physics as we understand them would change. The boundary between life and death would blur. Human consciousness would be exposed to entities and energies it was never designed to comprehend. Causing what? Eleanor presses. Mass psychosis at minimum. Daniel replies. At worst, the end of human civilization as we know it. The room falls silent as they absorb the implications of his words. How do we stop them? Marcus asks finally. Daniel leans forward. That's why I've been waiting for someone like you. Historians who understand the past, who can help piece together what happened at Blackwood and how it connects to what's happening now. He turns to a bookshelf, removing a worn leather-bound volume. This belonged to Emma Caldwell. It's her analysis of the ritual that was attempted in 1899, including the weaknesses in its design, the points of vulnerability. You think the same vulnerabilities would exist in their current approach? Eleanor asks. The technology has changed, but the fundamental principles haven't, Daniel confirms. They still need specific conditions, specific energies, specific catalysts. Children, Marcus says grimly. Daniel nods. Children with threshold sensitivity. They've been identifying and collecting them for years, housing them at special academies around the world, like the one in Egypt that funded the archaeological dig, James says, remembering the information they'd found. Exactly. The Cairo Academy for Gifted Youth. Daniel pulls up an image on his computer. A modern building with children visible in the courtyard. 47 children, ages 6 to 12, all exhibiting unusual perceptual abilities. And there are others? Eleanor asks. Similar academies in Peru, Indonesia, and Russia, all located near their construction sites. Daniel's expression is grim. They're preparing these children as conduits, just as Blackwood did with the orphans in 1899. We need to expose them, Marcus says firmly. Go public with what we know. Daniel shakes his head. The society has spent centuries building their cover, infiltrating institutions of power. They've discredited or eliminated anyone who's tried to expose them before. Then what do you suggest? Eleanor asks. Daniel looks at each of them in turn. We need to disrupt their network, not just expose them, but actively interfere with their plans. I've been developing technology designed to counteract their efforts. Devices that can detect and neutralize the energy signatures associated with threshold activity. He goes to a locked cabinet and opens it, revealing several strange-looking devices that resemble a cross between scientific instruments and ancient artifacts. But I can't deploy these alone, he continues. I need help, people who understand what's at stake, who can help coordinate a response across multiple locations. You're talking about a global operation, James says. We're just 3 academics. Not just you, Daniel replies. There's a network, former children from the Threshold Institute, others who have encountered the society and survived, researchers who have stumbled upon pieces of the truth. We've been watching, waiting, preparing for this moment. And you want us to join this resistance? Eleanor asks. You're already part of it, Daniel says simply. The moment you began investigating the Blackwood photograph, you entered this conflict. The question now is whether you'll fight or retreat. Eleanor exchanges glances with Marcus and James. In the span of a few weeks, their academic research has thrust them into something that sounds like the plot of a thriller novel. Ancient cults, global conspiracies, the fate of humanity hanging in the balance. And yet, the evidence is there. The photograph with its disturbing reflection, Thomas Harrow's journal, Joseph Miller's eyewitness account, the strange agelessness of Agatha Blackwood, the global network of construction sites and academies for gifted children. If what you're saying is true, Eleanor says slowly, then we have no choice but to help. But we need to know everything, the full history of the society, their current operations, your plans to counter them. Daniel nods. Of course, but we need to move quickly. Elizabeth Cooper's approach to you wasn't coincidental. It means they're concerned about your research, about what you might have discovered. They offered us collaboration, Marcus points out. Why not just eliminate us if we're a threat? Because of what you found in the photograph, Daniel explains. The reflection in the children's eyes, it's evidence of a specific moment in the 1899 ritual that has never been documented before. They want to know exactly what you've seen, what you've been able to enhance with modern technology. The hanging man, Eleanor says. Brother Ambrose, according to Thomas Harrow's journal. Yes, the voluntary sacrifice that served as the catalyst. Daniel's expression is solemn. What emerged from him in that moment, the dark substance described in multiple accounts, that was the first documented breach of the threshold in modern times. Understanding exactly what happened in that moment is crucial to both their plans and our efforts to counter them. James has been quiet, his expression thoughtful. Now he speaks. You said the society has infiltrated institutions of power. How do we know who to trust? How do we know you're not part of their network, trying to gather information about what we've discovered? Daniel smiles slightly. A fair question. Catherine Harrow vouched for me, but that might not be enough. He rolls up his sleeve, revealing a strange mark on his forearm, a symbol that matches one of the components of the circle in Joseph Miller's drawings, but inverted. All of us who were at the Threshold Institute received this mark, he explains. A protection that Emma and Thomas developed, based on their understanding of the society's methods. It disrupts the influence they can exert over sensitive individuals. Eleanor studies the mark. And this protects you from what exactly? From mental manipulation, from possession, from being used as a vessel. Daniel rolls his sleeve back down. The society can't control or influence anyone bearing this mark. It's how we've remained hidden from them, how we've built our resistance. Marcus leans forward. If we join you, what exactly would you expect us to do? Continue your research, but with additional resources and protection, Daniel replies. The historical perspective you bring is invaluable. We need to understand the past to counter what's happening now. He turns to a map on his wall, where red pins mark locations around the world. Our network has operatives near each of their major sites. With your help, we can coordinate a simultaneous disruption of their plans. And if we succeed? Eleanor asks. What then? Daniel's expression turns grim. The society has existed for millennia. We won't eliminate them entirely, but we can set them back decades, perhaps centuries. Buy humanity time to advance on our own terms, not through their forced evolution. The three researchers exchange glances again. The magnitude of what they're being asked to do is overwhelming. The implications terrifying. We need time to discuss this, Eleanor says finally. Daniel nods. Of course, but not too much time. Elizabeth Cooper gave you 3 days to consider her offer. That's how long you have before they take more direct action. As they prepare to leave, Daniel hands Eleanor a small device that resembles an antique pocket watch. Keep this with you, he says. It will alert you if anyone with threshold energy signatures approaches, and it will lead you to a safe meeting point if you decide to join us. Eleanor accepts it, feeling its strange weight in her hand. Thank you. Outside Daniel's office, the three of them walk in silence across the MIT campus, each lost in their own thoughts. Do we believe him? James asks finally. About all of this, the society, the global network, the imminent threat, the evidence supports at least some of his claims, Marcus replies. The construction sites are real. I've cross-referenced the locations with public records. The academies exist, and the historical documentation of the Blackwood incident is consistent with what he's describing. But a global conspiracy spanning millennia? James shakes his head. It sounds incredible. Eleanor finishes. Yes, but so does a woman who hasn't aged in over a century. So does a ritual that transformed Agatha Blackwood and her son into something not fully human. She looks down at the device Daniel gave her. It's antique exterior hiding technology she doesn't understand. We're historians. We deal in facts, in documented evidence, and the facts we've uncovered point to something extraordinary happening, something that began at Blackwood Orphanage in 1899 and continues to this day. So we join this. Resistance? Marcus asks. Eleanor takes a deep breath. I think we need to learn more before making that decision, but I also think we can't simply walk away from what we've discovered. The device in her hand suddenly vibrates, its face glowing with a soft blue light. A moment later, her phone rings. The caller ID shows Catherine Harrow's name. Catherine? Eleanor answers. Is everything all right? Catherine's voice is tense, frightened. They came to my apartment. 2 men asking about you, about the materials I shared with you. I didn't tell them anything, but her voice breaks. I don't think I'm safe here anymore. Where are you now? Eleanor asks, signaling to Marcus and James that something is wrong. I left through the back exit. I'm at a cafe a few blocks away. Stay there, Eleanor says firmly. We're coming to get you. She ends the call, turning to her colleagues. They've gone after Catherine. We need to get her somewhere safe. This is happening too fast, James says, his face pale. Yesterday we were just researchers studying an historical photograph. Now we're running from some ancient cult. Not running, Eleanor corrects. Protecting an innocent woman who helped us. Whatever we decide about Daniel's offer, we owe Catherine our help. The device in her hand pulses again, the blue light growing stronger. What is that thing doing? Marcus asks. Eleanor studies it. I think it's pointing us towards something. The light intensifies when she turns in a particular direction, or somewhere. The safe meeting point Daniel mentioned, James suggests. Eleanor nods slowly. Let's get Catherine first, then we'll decide our next move. As they hurry toward their car, Eleanor can't help looking back at the MIT buildings behind them, wondering if they're being watched, if even now the society is tracking their movements, preparing to eliminate the threat they represent. The weight of the photograph's secret, the reflection in 15 pairs of children's eyes, the hanging man, the dark substance emerging from his mouth, seems to press down upon her, a burden of knowledge she never asked to bear, but cannot now set aside. Whatever they decide, their lives have already changed irrevocably. The moment they zoomed in on that century-old photograph and shuddered at what they found, they became part of something larger and darker than they could have imagined. A conflict that began in the basement of an orphanage in 1899 and now threatens to engulf the world. The shadow of Blackwood has fallen across their lives, and in that shadow, something is watching, waiting, preparing to emerge. Just as it was more than a century ago when 15 children stood in a circle and witnessed the threshold beginning to open.